Hey everyone, welcome back to the Nello Reads channel. Our first pro-revenge story of the day comes from eGrant03. Bully me into selling you my car? You pissed off the wrong mama bear. So, about 8 years ago, I was selling a used car. Engine light was on, the AC needed recharging, and the fuel pump or something was out. So I go to my local trusted sales site. The advertisement goes up with a few pictures and the words, "I work weird hours, so I may not be able to accept a phone call. Please only text me." Yay to working swings and midnights, right? It was actually college classes, but same thing for me. So a few days in, I get a pretty standard text. "Hi, I'm Matt. Is your car still for sale?" Matt isn't his real name, but you get the idea. So I text back that it is. A few standard texts about price, why is the engine light on, who did you get the quote from. I listed an approximate price on the repairs as quoted from my trusted mechanic, and whatnot go back and forth. The next day, I got a text from him saying, "Are you gonna take all your crap out of the car before you sell it to me? Or is that my job?" Unwarranted hostility? Really? WTF, man. He's not the only interested party, so I text him back. "I'm not selling the car to you, so don't worry about it." I never said I would sell to him, he never asked if he was the only interested party, and others were arranging test drives already. I didn't need him and his less than full price partial commitment. And the crap he was complaining about is 3 textbooks and a bag I keep clothes in. 4 things. This guy wouldn't take no for an answer and started calling and texting about how my car's paint is peeling. True, but the pics and description said so. And how dare I ask so much? $1,000 for a piece of crap car. I started replying for a little, telling him he wasn't going to get the car, and that I had other interested buyers, so he didn't need to worry about it. Then things got personal. The site gave you the option to link to Facebook, so you could post on both places at the same time. So I had. I didn't have my privacy settings turned on, as it was still early into Facebook's absolute reign, and I actually trusted them at the time. Silly me, I know. I hadn't anticipated that he would be able to find my info through the website's post, and find my name, my location, my mother-in-law's obituary, etc. Surprise, he did. He starts to text me about how I should be ashamed of myself for saying no to him, a muscular dude, and me being a quite round female. He included a picture in one text, and he wasn't the muscular, built man he claimed to be. He looked like a beanpole with 2 ab muscles, so WTF, dude. He asked me if I even knew anything about cars, or if I made the post while on my period, so I didn't know what I was talking about. He texted that I should be lucky I was already married, or else he would come to my house and show me how a real man handles a little B-word. He got close, but didn't have an address, and the way my address pulls up on GPS, he never would find my apartment, thankfully. Small side info, since I was in college at the time and needed a more flexible schedule, I worked as a school crossing guard. Every 2 weeks or so, we'd go in to sign our time cards in order to get paid. This crossing guard gig was a hire through my local police department. Not all crossing guard gigs are the same, but this one was. During one of these visits into the office, I was using my phone while I was waiting for my boss to get to me, as my name is low in the alphabet. I hadn't yet blocked the dude, as it hadn't been long since this started, and I was hoping it would fizzle out on its own. I didn't check my phone in class, choosing to turn it off to avoid ADHDing on it the entire day, and I was often flooded with several hours of texts all at once. What I saw on my phone drove me over the cliff. He started texting about pictures I had posted on Facebook about my 8 or 7-year-old son. He had just majorly crossed the line. The cleanest versions of his texts include things like, "Your kid is just as ugly as you are. I hope you don't plan on him leaving home to get a wife anytime soon." And how a smudge of dirt on his face from a day at the zoo looked like I beat him. "I didn't sell you a car, and you're taking out your rage by threatening to assault me and accusing me of beating my kid? Oh, hell no." Apparently, I was loud when I said that, because my boss stepped right over to me next and asked what was wrong. Great person, 10 out of 10, would boss again. I told her that I was getting these abusive texts from a rando that tried to buy my car. I told her I was about to erase the text and block him, but she's like, no, wait, don't do that, let me see your phone. So happy I didn't delete them, because this next part still makes my heart sore. I offer, and she takes my phone, reading all the sick and vile things he texted to me. She tells me to wait until she's cleared the lobby of the other crossing guards, so I do. She then tells me to follow her behind the security doors at the police station, still having my phone. I don't know what's happening, but I liked and trusted her, so I do. I follow her back to her office, where she works on her computer, referring to my phone on occasion. She asks if all I have is the phone number, or if I got his name too. I tell her I only got a first name, and scroll to the text where he introduced himself. A semi-uncomfortable amount of time later, she hands back my phone. Something to mention, my boss isn't just administrative. I didn't know it at the time, but she's a full-on lieutenant in the local PD. She came up the ranks from patrol, moving to a position where she exclusively investigated child, elder, disabled abuse complaints before moving into her current desk position. Needless to say, she didn't take people threatening to harm kids lightly. Because I hadn't blocked the number, I still had the text messages with the dude's name, and she had used it to cross-search him and the phone number. Long story short, she knew exactly who he was. She said not to worry, but don't delete or respond to his text anymore. If it got worse, I should call her or 911, whichever was more appropriate. Unconcerned and happy she had the situation in hand, I left and went to class. When I'm back in the office to sign my next time card 2 weeks later, I had several unread texts from the guy. I had filtered them so I didn't see them pop up and hadn't read them. I had sold the car for full asking price and had all but forgotten about the entire situation. My boss tells me to wait for her again, as she said she had something else for me to sign, and I again return to her office. She briefly explains what she had for me. An actionable complaint that she needed me to sign from my issue 2 weeks ago. I remember everything all over again. She must see my face, because she tells me not to worry and that she can tell me what's going on more after I actually sign the form. So I do. Dear Reddit, this is the best situation anyone could have asked for. The phone number tied to many people, as the provider was known for cheap cell service for those that were desperate for a way to contact people, services, and employment. But with the name Matt, again, fake name for story purposes, she was able to find out who was messing with me. She then got a driver's license, which led to an address, which led to a police report for possible domestic violence. Fall down the rabbit hole some more, and you find out that this dude had 5 kids by 4 women, and he was in arrears on his child support to all of them. He hadn't been paying for 10 plus years, and it was in the neighborhood of 30 to 50K if memory serves. But he somehow, just 2 weeks ago, requested a title transfer for a new to him, quite fancy old car. I don't remember the kind, but think high-end show car and massive insurance premiums. Being so far in arrears meant that my boss was able to place a seizure order on the car so it could be sold to pay back the child support. One of the mothers live in a state where fleeing child support meant you could have a warrant issued for your arrest. When she called the interested parties in that state to see if they wanted her to execute the arrest warrant, they said yes, with much haste. It was a funny turn of phrase, so I always remembered it. One conversation later, and my boss was able to determine that he was using his brother's social security number on his employment forms to avoid child support garnishments. This is all sorts of illegal, so she notified the guy's HR department so it could be corrected. They informed her he would be fired for fraudulently submitting false documents. She then told me that about 4 days ago, she had executed the warrant on this guy for felony child abandonment, and that the state he was to be held for was already en route to pick him up. It carried a 8 to 12 year sentence, and he still had to pay back his child support. I could have dealt with the comment, I could have dealt with the not taking no for an answer, even dealt with the cyber stalking, a little. But when your twisted mind okays you to bring my kid into the picture, you've crossed the line. If you would have just stopped at no, you wouldn't be in jail right now. To be honest, I'm pretty amazed that the guy in the story was able to get away with all the illegal stuff he was doing for as long as he had. Like, he was bound to get caught sooner or later, but trying to act like Mr. Tough Guy on the internet sped that process right along. Our next story comes from Ray Cannett. Look at this giant hole you dug for yourself. Now watch as I bury you in it. Hello Reddit, longtime lurker and commenter, first time posting. This occurred back in the late 90s in Australia, so Aussie terms may be used. I was in my third and final year at university studying archaeology. Due to recurring and severe illness in the second semester of my second year, I had been unable to complete several core subjects and had to repeat them. This included an archaeological field school held in mid-year holidays, where you would implement the techniques you had already learned. This field school was required if you wished to enroll in a particular subject, but not everyone studying was headed in that direction. I had successfully completed the previous year's field school, but due to my illness, was unable to complete the associated course, so had to retake them both again. This university has a number of campuses dotted around the country, and some overseas. The field school is offered to students on 2 campuses. The main campus, located north of Capricorn, and one of its offshoots, located even further north of Capricorn. The field schools, however, are held on the main campus, so those participating are required to travel to attend. For some, it's across town. For others, it's several hours in a car. Needless to say, those attending from the sister campus do not do so lightly, or cheaply. My lecturer, whom we shall call Matt, was a bloody legend. He was a brilliant lecturer, has authored 2 books, and is still working in his field, albeit at a different university than the one in this story. He knew his crap, was easygoing, friendly, would sit and share a jug of beer with you on a Friday, and I only ever saw him angry once. This is important for later. Also note that grading went as follows in descending order. Pass with high distinction, 85 to 100%. Pass with distinction, 75 to 84%. Pass with credit, 65 to 74%. Pass, 50 to 64%. Pass conceded, 48 to 49%. And fail, less than 50%. The event. Matt and his counterpart at the sister campus had been granted permission to conduct this year's field school in a gully adjacent to a historic and protected/listed cemetery. The gully actually split the cemetery in 2, and was used basically as a garbage midden. Due to the nature of the gully, there was only one space permitted for a certain number of dig sites. Groups were to be allocated a site once they arrived on the first day, after they decided on their members. As I was living on campus and had no car, I knew I'd be unable to arrive at the field school at the specified beginning times. I'd be half an hour late on the Friday and Monday mornings, and a full hour late on the weekend. I'd spoken to Matt about this, and as we knew each other quite well, and had shared jugs of beer quite often, he agreed that I would not be penalized for arriving late, but that I'd most likely be allocated a group to make up numbers, rather than choose my own. It couldn't be helped, so I agreed. This is also important for later. Friday rolls around, I arrive at the site a half hour late, all good, and I'm introduced to my group. There are 4 of us. Myself, the only female in the group, but experienced in how the field school is run due to my previous year. Gaza, an older grizzled male geology student who was taking the course just as a matter of interest. Baza, a young male geology student who, by all other indications, was heading toward a lucrative career in the mining sector, and Daza, another young male geology student, good friends with Baza, also headed towards a lucrative career in the mining sector. All 3 of my counterparts were from the sister campus, so they had traveled at some expense to attend. They'd already been allocated a dig site, and when introduced, Matt tells them I've got field school experience, so to utilize my knowledge. Baza and Daza smile and nod, giving me a friendly wave. Gaza grunts, but a little later when surveying our area, we get to chatting. He's a nice enough bloke, just a bit miffed he's been put in a group with a bunch of, quote, young craps, and was worried he'd be carrying us or keeping us in line. Nah, mate, I'm here to get crap done, get the data I'll need for next semester, and hopefully enjoy myself as much as I had the previous year. Now, let me tell you, Lara Croft and Indiana Jones have royally effed the perception of the greater public when it comes to archaeology. No, Jurassic Park doesn't count, as they're paleontologists dealing with animal remains. Archaeology/archaeologists deal with human remains. A lot of what happens on an archaeological dig is repetitive and monotonous. You survey your area using surveying equipment, sketch and take photos of your allocated site before measuring out your 1 meter by 1 meter dig pit. You take more pictures/sketches of the still untouched pit, as well as taking an initial soil sample. You scrape off a spit of the earth, this is a layer of predetermined depth, in this case 5 centimeters, And once done, you test the pH levels of the soil you've removed, documenting everything you've scraped up. Yep, more photos and sketches, before taking more photos and sketches of the pit and anything that may be lodged in there before scraping off another spit. If you hit an object, you remove the soil from around it, but don't actually remove the object until you are removing the layer of soil from beneath it. It must remain in place to preserve the data. Boring, I know, but it is also very important for later. Also important to note is soil composition in relation to how deep you can safely dig your pit before extending the boundaries to prevent soil contamination or the walls collapsing. Our dig site had quite loose sandy soil, so it was announced that every 50 centimeters down, we would have to extend the sides of the pit by 50 centimeters on each side. It wasn't anticipated that we'd get much beyond 1 meter down. Definitely not further than 1.5 meters, so we'd only need to expand once, possibly twice. This was how they had divided up the entire site to fit us all in. It became very clear very quickly that neither Baza or Daza had anticipated how monotonous the next 4 days were going to be. Both Gaza and I had to repeatedly call them over to assist us with surveying, and when it came to the soil scraping, they were excited at first, but then became bored as we had to yet again record every minute detail. As I was the only one who had thought to bring my camera along, one that required film as this was before inexpensive digital cameras and smartphones were at least 10 years away, I was the one responsible for taking photos. This included candid shots of the entire field school, other groups, the lecturers, and our dig site. Day 1 of the field school ends, and we all head back to wherever for the night to kick back, relax, and prepare for another day of work. The next morning, Saturday, I arrived at the field school 1 hour late, so at 10 a.m., as per the bus schedule. Seeing as how I'd already had this okayed by Matt, I'm not anticipating any issue with my tardiness. I get to the cemetery, and seeing Matt give him a cheery, "Morning, Matt, all good, yeah?" Matt turns and glowers at me. I mean, if looks could kill, I'd be right at home in that cemetery with all the other dead people. You know how I mentioned earlier how easygoing and laid back Matt is, and I've only ever seen him angry once? Well, this was that time. Matt was pacing, teeth grinding, fists clenched. He was pissed. "Just get to your group and get to work," Matt practically snarled at me. I'm worried now that he's angry with me for being late, even though we'd previously squared it. I'm nervous and worried because we'd had a really good rapport in the past, and now I'm thinking that I've done something that's going to make my last semester at uni hell on earth. So I ask, have I done something wrong? I know I was late, but like I told you before the field school, this was the first bus I could get out here. I'm really sorry if that's a problem. Matt sighs and shook his head. "No, OP, it's not you. You've done nothing wrong. I just can't deal with it right now. So just go to your dig site and get on with it. I'll talk to you later." I head to my dig site, and what I find there almost has me in tears. When we'd packed up the previous day, our pit was 1 meter by 1 meter square with a depth of 30 centimeters. I now stand before a 1 meter by 1 meter hole in the ground, dug down to a depth of approximately 3 meters. There are mounds of sandy dirt surrounding our pit, and I can see a multitude of objects that have been excavated just sitting there. Other groups are staring at us, but trying to look as though they aren't staring. Nobody will speak to us either. Gaza is livid. The dude is almost overcome with anger. Baza and Daza both look very pale, like they just want to puke. I'm all, what the ever-loving F has happened here? Who the F did this? It turns out that after everyone had left the site on Friday night, Baza and Daza and another mate of theirs and another group, we'll call him Keza, got together and got drunk. It was during this that they decided to continue digging our pit, so they broke into the cemetery with a shovel and proceeded to dig down until one of them passed out crap-faced at the bottom of a 1 meter by 1 meter hole in loose sandy soil. The fact that the dude managed to wake up and make it out of the hole without the entire thing collapsing in on him is a miracle in itself. Matt had been called out to the site at 3 a.m. by the police, who had been called because one of the residents in the area saw something dodgy going on. Needless to say, Baza, Daza, and Keza were all up Crap Creek in a barbed wire canoe with a rusty teaspoon for a paddle. They couldn't leave until they'd sobered up, but had been told that, in no uncertain terms, after the field school finished that day, they were to pack up and F off. Matt and his counterpart would deal with booting them from the archaeological program on Tuesday after the field school ended. This left Gaza and I in a foobar situation. Luckily for him, Gaza was able to join the group that Keza had been part of, especially since the group were all from the sister campus. I, on the other hand, was left hanging like an unwanted tampon string out of the gusset of a bikini. There were no other groups that could take me, and besides, something had to be done about the cluster F that was my dig site. So Saturday ended with me trying to document whatever I could, and to keep Baza and Daza out of my hair. I gave them my camera and told them to take photographic documentation of every single piece of evidence that they had dug up. They had to use the scale measurement and a title board that was supposed to identify the item by date, location, spit level, etc. So off they went with a miniature whiteboard marker, scale measurement, and my camera. This kept them occupied for most of the day, as there were in excess of 200 items that they'd unearthed in their drunken dig for buried whatever the F they were looking for. I ended up filling in that hole, wishing every shovelful of soil that Baza and Daza were still passed out drunk at the bottom. But such is life. Matt ended up tacking me onto another group in an observational role, as the members of that group were all from my campus and would be in the same second semester class as me. The Revenge. Now, as I previously mentioned, the field school was linked to another class held during the second semester. This class essentially took all of the data and evidence that had been unearthed during the field school, and you examined, tested, collated, and then submitted a report based on those findings as your final assessment piece. Seeing as how I only had 1 day's worth of actual data and evidence, I could not submit the field school report as required. As this was a core class and I didn't want to have to retake it for a third year, I approached Matt to talk about how we could rectify this into a situation where I would be allowed to pass and continue with my studies. After some discussion, Matt agreed to allow me to do a field school critique using what had happened to me as essentially a how-to on how not to conduct/participate in a field school. I had the data from the first day to use in the class, and then the photos and sketches taken by myself and the Dodgy brothers, Baza and Daza, of the objects we'd excavated. After developing the film of the field school, I discovered some interesting things. The candid photos I took on the Friday included shots of Baza and Daza not only behaving inappropriately, but interfering with the equipment we were using, and therefore possibly contaminating the data we had legitimately acquired. They were also shown to be in areas that we weren't allowed to be in, touching things that didn't belong to them, and also damaging ornaments left on some of the historic graves closest to the dig site. Then there were the photos that they had taken on Saturday. They had apparently decided that because I wasn't overjoyed by the fact that they'd completely screwed me over by digging that hole, they'd make the only photographs of the artifacts they'd unearthed unusable by writing inappropriate comments and cursing/slurs towards me on the title board. One of the ones that is stuck in my head was a large clay/ceramic clam decoration, on which they'd written, "Oh, I do love a day beside the seaside with a hairy clam." This was the only photo of the clam that had been taken. When we filled the pits back in, we had to re-enter the artifacts, so I couldn't just take a new picture. Also, over 200 pieces had been unearthed, remember? And Matt had told me to use everything I'd gathered to write my report. So I used every single photo, including the ones that said I was a C-word, not in the friendly way most Aussies use the term, and that alluded to wishing violence on me. At the end of the semester, I submitted my report, knowing full well that the best I could hope for was a pass, but that was enough to get me through to my final year. The fallout. I found this out from Matt at the beginning of my final year at uni. So it turns out that when Matt had booted the Dodgy brothers from the archaeological program, they had been allowed to continue on with their degree studying geology, but that they were not allowed to have anything to do with archaeology and were on very thin ice. When I submitted my report and Matt saw the extent of what they had done, kindly documented by themselves on the most part, and just how badly they had screwed me over, Gaza was fine as the group he'd been moved to had all the appropriate data and had been able to submit a proper field report, he went ballistic. He called a meeting with the deans from both campuses, the Department of Tropical Environments and Societies, Geology Department, and the Department of Anthropology, Archaeology, and Society, Archaeological Department, for both campuses. He presented to them my field report, told them about how he'd been teaching me for the past 3 years, and had it not been for the illness affecting me during my second year, how I would have likely completed my degree at this point. He also spoke about my previous field school, my behavior, and had I not been forced to withdraw due to my health and based on my previous work I'd submitted, I would have likely received a D or HD on my work. The fact that I averaged C and D during the time I was ill showed my academic prowess. The fact that the only grade he was able to give me for the report he currently had in his position was a PC was a blow to my academic record that was wholly undeserved. He said a lot of other things, but the end result was that Baza and Daza were not only expelled from the archaeological program, they were now booted from the geological one as well. Furthermore, they were expelled and banned from the university itself, which meant they could never re-enroll, and any other universities they applied to would be able to see this, and the reasons why. Essentially, they were blocked from being able to obtain any university degree in that area, and to enroll in any university for a different career, they would have to wade through oceans of bureaucratic red tape and jump through so many hoops they'd make the Duracell bunny jealous. Unfortunately, this experience soured me on archaeology as a career path. Luckily for me, I was able to pick up a couple of extra courses in history and English that I graduated with a BA with a major in English literature and a minor in history and archaeology. I went back to uni after a gap year and obtained my graduate diploma in secondary education. I think this story is a perfect example of some people just want to watch the world burn. Baza and Daza seem like two guys that probably won't get their lives figured out until it's too late. Not like they can really get them together anymore though, after being banned from pretty much anywhere that teaches you anything. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed today's stories, and I'll see you in the next video.